All right, let's take a look at another sign here. And your first impression of this sign, you might be thinking, well, man, that's a filthy looking sign. You can see looks like there's a lot of grime on this sign. And just walking by as somebody who might not understand what this sign is saying, you might sort of think, well, why is that sign so filthy? Well, if we break this down, you'll probably have a good understanding why it looks so filthy. We'll start with his main heading of the whole sign, and this first part over here, not or if you're going to talk about a, the naze refers to the daytime, the daytime, and 쓰레기 means garbage, garbage, and 봉투 refers to usually some sort of vinyl plastic bag, and by that logic, of course, um, you're obviously referring to a garbage bag, a garbage bag. And this word here, 내놓다, I know it says 내놓지, but this chi 맙시다 is something that we're going to talk about separately. But I'll write the base form of this verb here, 내놓다. That would be the base form of this word that we're looking at here. And that means it has a few different meanings depending on the situation. And I'll actually talk a little bit more about it because we actually see the same verb down here, and there's actually a space. So there's no space in this case up here, but there's actually a space down here, and there actually shouldn't be a space. But I'll mention later when we get to this point why maybe this person made a mistake and actually included a space. But it is actually a word on its own, nenota, without a space, and it actually means to put outside, to put and then leave outside. And as you can imagine, this verb would very, very commonly be used, of course, with garbage bags, because the garbage bags are usually something that you're taking and leaving outside, especially on the day where garbage is being picked up. Now, what is this ending here? Well, there's sort of two endings in one here. So if this is the verb, there's sort of something added to it and then something added to that. One thing that you can add to verbs is 지 말다. And we see that here. We see that here, and then that is this. And this letter here actually gets taken out here because something else gets added to it. And I'll just show you what gets added to it in the end. So what's being added to this is, so that sort of replaces this letter, and then shida comes after it. So we're sort of seeing, I like to call these like Frankenstein grammatical principles or parts of sentences, because we actually have something. So what we originally had was 내놓다, and then this gets added to that, and then this one gets added to that. So you're sort of seeing something on top of something else on top of something else. So if we break all this down, 지 말다 is often added to verbs to say to not do, or it's very, very commonly in command. So for example, you very commonly hear it if you're going to say something like hajima or 공부하지마 or 만들지마 or some verb 지마, and again this is the base form here, 말다. But if you added some sort of an ending to this, making it an imperative ending where you're making a command, telling somebody what to do, you would say, if you're going to say don't study, you'd say 공부하지, and then and then the base form would be 말다. But whatever you add to this, sometimes you could add 세요, or you might add just this, which would actually merge it to that, and it would just say 공부하지마. But anyways, this 지 말다, which we're adding here, is either telling somebody to not do something, or saying that this thing shouldn't be done, or won't be done, or that as a group we shouldn't be doing this action. And it heavily depends on the situation, but you, as a beginner, you'd most commonly see this as a command telling somebody to not do something. And this is the example I used over here. You can say 하지 마세요, or hajima, or 공부하지 마세요, or whatever verb, and then 지마 or 지마세요 would say to not do that particular thing. And this next ending here, 뭐뭐 합시다, again, you could add this, and let's say we're adding it to hada. If you're adding this to hada, it would look like 합시다. And that means let's. Sorry, I spelled let's wrong in English. Let's. And let's do whatever we're talking about before this. So, for example, in this case, it's actually let's do a negative thing. So a lot of the times you might see, oh, something 합시다, and I would say, oh, let's do this. And if we bring it back to this 공부하다, which means to study, if you were to say 공부합시다, that would be like saying let's go and study, or let's study together. But in this case, what we're saying is let's do this non-action, this negative action, the opposite of what we should be doing, or a negative thing. So in other words, let's not do whatever this verb is here, and the verb is to take out and to leave outside. So if we look at, and I'll write this down here. So not do is the something chima, so not do, and then this part here is the let's. So as you probably know, Korean grammars often vary backwards, and so if I said this whole sentence, the main heading of the sentence, this would say, let's not leave our garbage bags outside during the daytime. And you might be wondering, the one thing I didn't talk about in this sentence is nun. Nun is probably one of the most frustrating things for Korean learners, because it's one of the things that appears in almost practically every sentence. Maybe not every sentence, but practically every sentence. You see it here, and you'll see it all the time. And here it is. Here it is here again, and you see it almost in every sentence. But it's one of the things that, in order to really, really, really understand what it means, it takes years of studying and years of exposure to the language. I sort of talk about it and liken it to and the in English, where and the, I mean, they're practically in every sentence in English. But my wife can speak English for all intents and purposes perfectly. But she sometimes gets confused between the and if I was going to say, I ate a hamburger versus I ate the hamburger. It's a very subtle difference, and it takes really a true native speaker to fully understand it. And it's the same thing with, and I'm not saying nun and un are equal to and the. I'm just saying that their confusions or the difficulty in fully understanding them are similar. I'm not saying their meanings are similar. I'm just saying the idea that we have these very, 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 very common things in the language that take a long time to understand. That's something like nun. And in this case, what's happening is this is being added to say that during the daytime, specifically during the daytime, let's not leave our garbage bags outside. During the daytime specifically, let's not do that. However, there will be some time where you should leave your garbage bags outside. But during the daytime, don't leave them outside. But there will be some other time, and you'll see down here, of course, you can imagine it's the nighttime. There is a time where you can leave it outside, but during the daytime, don't leave your garbage bags outside. Now, I kept making those ridiculous sounds because nun basically has the meaning of that ridiculous sound that I kept on making, where it's during the daytime, you don't leave your garbage bags outside. But at nighttime, okay, leave your garbage bags outside. That's the meaning of nun in this sentence. It's just sort of saying, okay, in this particular instance, this thing is happening, but in some other situation, another thing will be happening. I talk about that in a lesson. I forget the lesson offhand, but it's something I just off the top of my head. I think it's lesson 102, I would guess. And I talk about breaking down all the how nun can be used as a more complicated particle. Speaking about lessons, I should mention that of course I have a lesson on adding commands just in general. So here just saying just adding seo, or I have a lesson just talking about how you can add commands to something. So you can add this as a command, or you can add this as a command, or you can add this as a command, or you can add this as a command. And at the end of the lesson, I talk about how, again, if we just go down here, I can add this as a command, or this is a command, or this is a command, or this is a command. And I can also talk about how you can have a negative command. a negative command. And that's what we were talking about earlier, and how you can say something kajima, or in this case you see kajimase, or kajimayo, or kajima. So I have a lesson on that, and of course I have a lesson on this hapshida, or this adding this biob and then shida, and I'll just show you what lesson number that is, just in case you ever want to go studying for it. So here it is. Here you can either add this and shida if the consonant or the stem ends in a vowel, or you can add this and shida if the stem ends in a consonant. And this, I talk about how that means let's do that particular thing. So if I go down here, it says, oh, let's do that particular action. And I think that's all I want to talk about for lessons there. All right, before we get into this, let's look at just this very, very quick sentence up here. Gegotada means, and again, the base form of this word is gegotada, and that means to be clean. And if you add this thing here, this is used to say that you're going to be describing an upcoming noun. So not gegotada, but gegotan something would be clean something. So clean. And this word here, kil is like a street or a road. And kormok is sort of like a little alley. And kormokil is, you'd use that to sort of refer to not like the main roads in a city, not like the main roads that people would drive on, to get to and from work. But this is sort of referring to the roads or the streets that most people's houses would be on. So it's just sort of smaller roads, and you can imagine you want to keep those roads clean, because if that's where you're living, you want to keep those roads clean. So I'll just write the word streets here, but it's more than streets. It's not the main streets in the city. It's talking about the more smaller streets that maybe a lot of houses and apartments are on and stuff like that. And this final thing, and I'll talk about this all together, this adding this, and I talk about this in lesson 15, is used to say for this particular thing. And this is actually not a full sentence, but you would say, so this means for. So for example, what's happening is you're saying for clean streets, or for the purpose of making clean streets, or in order to get clean streets, and they're going to say let's do all of this. Let's do all of this. So this is just sort of saying, hey, you know what? In order to get clean streets, or for clean streets, or in order for us to live in clean streets, let's do all of these particular things. Now, you might be wondering what this thing is right here, and I'm sorry there's a wire in the way. There's something holding up the sign. But this says we ha ya, and I'll write this down here because I'm running out of space up at the top. But this says we ha ya. And you might be wondering, well, what is? I've learned we hey before, but something this or this we hey, and saying, oh, and this is more commonly used in speech to say for something. So for example, if I say 여자 친구, if I said 여자친구를 위해, and it wouldn't be this one, it would be this one. If I said 여자친구를 위해, that would be for my girlfriend. And I have a wife, I don't have a girlfriend. But if I said 여자친구를 위해, that would mean for my girlfriend. And then the end of the sentence would have to say, I bought her flowers, or I bought her a present, or I did something for her. But again, this is not this what I have written so far here, which is very similar to the sentence that is up here. I just some noun and then we, and it's a noun being described by an adjective. But this is actually not a full sentence. Anyways, you might be saying, well, I've heard of this before, and I talk about this we hey in lesson 13, and you say, well, what is this we ha ya? And I actually mentioned this also in the same lesson where I introduce we hada. But actually, we hey and we ha ya are the same thing. And actually, hey and ha ya are actually the same thing. And actually, ha ya is actually the more official way to write it. And it's just always, or almost always, in some formal and government documents and stuff like that, and formal writings, ha ya is actually the way that you would see it. But hey is almost always the way that it's written and pronounced. So if you're just wondering where this we haya is coming from, well, haya is actually the same thing as hey. And it's actually the more original way of saying hey, but it's more colloquially and almost always said as hey. So you could actually say this as we hey up here. And I'm just going to completely cover over what was written on the sign before. Now, if we continue along, we'll go through all of these three main sentences and go through the stuff at the bottom. So this is kind of a cool looking sign. They're asking the general public or anybody who reads this sign three sentences and three questions. And this first one, this says I would say it as ashijio. And the base form of this is, again, another one of these Frankenstein grammatical principles where we have a grammatical principle on top of a grammatical principle, and all that you're supposed to sort of deduce what's happening. I saw Inception for the first time a few weeks ago, and it's sort of like a dream inside a dream inside a dream. The base form is arda, and she gets added to arda, and if that happens, and you'll have to go to lesson 7 to really get your irregulars, and actually it's the same principle as to why this letter was taken off here. If you're ever curious about why these letters are changing, you really need to go see lesson 7, and I talk about all the irregulars in Korean really, really in depth. But anyways, if I add she, which is this one, to a verb or an adjective where it ends in this letter, it actually gets dropped. So it's not al-shi or aru-shi, it's just a-shi. So, and that's what I have here, is she. And alda means to know. To know. And that's actually the only real meaning, the only word that's in this entire thing is know. But she is added, and I have a whole lesson on this. She is added really just to give politeness to the person that you're referring to. So you would use she not if the person that you're speaking to deserves high respect, but you would use she to if the person who is acting on this verb or who is doing this verb deserves high respect. And I specifically say not the person who you're speaking to, because let's say you were talking to a young child, a 5-year-old child, who in that case you wouldn't have to use honorifics. But if you're talking to a 5-year-old child about their parents, and you were talking about their parents knowing something, or let's say you were a teacher, and you were talking to your students. Now, if a teacher talks to a student, you don't generally need to use polite forms. But if you're talking to your students about your principal requires high respect. In that case, you'd have to use honorifics when you're talking about if your principal is the person doing this particular verb. So anyways, this is the government talking to the public, and in that case, the government always wants to be as polite as they possibly can. So the public is actually the person who's knowing, and I'll get to what's going on later in a second, but it's really the public that's acting, and that's why they're using this honorific form here. Now, geo is very, very most commonly said in speech and even written most commonly as just cho, and the informal way of saying that would just be ji. And as I said, we're not going to use an informal one in this case because it's the government talking to the general public, which in that case they're always going to use very, very polite forms. But these two things very, very commonly condense into cho. And I have a whole, again, you can imagine, I have a whole lesson on when you would use these two things. And there's a lot of different times and situations when you'd want to use them. But one of the most common, and this is what they're doing here, is to sort of say, right? Or I'm Canadian, so sort of like saying A. And if I put all this together, and again, this she doesn't have any meaning. That she doesn't have any meaning at all. It's just there to add politeness. It's sort of like saying you, and by you I mean the general public. It's like saying, you know, right? Or you know the right way to do this, right? Or you know, A. That's what this whole thing would be. It's like, you know what you're supposed to be doing, right? Or you know, A. And, well, you're saying, well, what are they saying, do I know? Well, this is what they're saying that you know. Everybody in Korea typically knows this rule, but they usually don't follow it. So it's saying, look, you know the rule, right? And then, okay, this is what I guess, and again, the person should know. 쓰레기, again, we know means garbage. Garbage. 꼭 means definitely or must, and I'll just say must, sure. It's just an adverb that means must, that you can say, you should definitely be doing this. Here's the word 봉투 again, which means, again, we saw here, it means bag, so that means bag. And then this is kind of a harder word, and you would very rarely see it in most other cases, or in other situations, but it's specifically used with garbage bags. And this word refers to the fact that, and actually even before I explain what the word means, I'm going to sort of explain how garbage works in Korea. At least in Canada, I assume, because I grew up in Canada, but I've never been in a situation where I've had to really worry about my garbage collection before. I assume that our garbage collection, the city collects the money just from our taxes. Now, we don't pay the garbage men to come pick up our garbage, but I'm assuming that somehow the city, they tax us in some way, and some of that tax money goes to the garbage collection. In Korea, maybe that's true. I'm not sure if some of my taxes in Korea go towards garbage collection. I'm sure that some of it does. But in Korea, they have sort of a different way of doing it, and that is you actually pay for the garbage bags themselves. And when you throw out garbage, and specifically when you throw out just regular garbage, I'm not talking about recycling. I'm just talking about actual garbage. And there's two main types of garbage. There's one that's called 일반 쓰레기. 일반 쓰레기. I'll write that over here. 일반 쓰레기. And that just means regular garbage. And that's just your garbage that you can't recycle. It's not food garbage. It's just 일반 means regular, and 쓰레기 means garbage. So you pay for this something called an 일반 쓰레기 봉투, and you know what 봉투 means now. An 일반 쓰레기 봉투, it might cost 50 cents or something like that, or depending on how big it is, it might cost $1. And when I say 50 cents, I mean 500won, which is roughly equivalent to 50 cents, or 1000won, which is roughly equivalent to $1. So you actually pay for the bags, and then you put all your garbage in the bags and you leave it outside. And of course, not during the daytime, but at nighttime. But anyways, you pay for the bag, and it's the same thing with food waste. You pay, the food waste bags are much smaller because you don't want to have a massive bag of food waste in your house. But the food waste bags cost usually somewhere around 5 cents or 10 cents, and you usually buy a whole bunch of them all in one pack. You might get 30 of them in a pack or something like that. It might cost a few dollars. And this word is saying the correct bag that you should put the food waste in. So, and it's talking about the fact that you're buying these bags, that you pay to use the bags themselves, and that's part of the whole fee. It's very hard to translate this word, but it's the idea that you're paying for the bag and you're paying for the usage of the bag. So that's what that would translate to. I could imagine it might also be used like if you're talking about internet, and if you have some sort of internet plan and you're paying for like a certain amount of usage, maybe you get 60 gigabytes or something like that, and you're paying for some sort of usage. So that's what that would be used for. And I'm not going to write a translation for this word because it's very, very hard, but you can sort of ignore this and just understand that this means that you're paying for the usage of this specific bag. And tamta, again, the base form of this word is tamta. But in this case, we have this grammatical principle added to it. And this is saying, okay, this grammatical principle here is saying after you do this verb and all this previous stuff, ... And I guess the ... is referring to this next thing. And again, you see ... and that's going to be it's going to lead you into this next thing. So if we look at this first sentence, it says, look, you know this, right? Oh, I didn't tell you what tamta means. Tamta means to put into. So, and I got to write that down somewhere. Put in, or put. So, put your garbage, or you must put your garbage in these specific bags that you're paying for. And then ... And now this next question, and you probably know this word. 어디 means where. And this A is referring to the location, so it's just saying where, question mark. Now, this word here is very, very similar to kok, and it's just sort of saying must, or it must be in this particular place. So must, yup jip, means, well, jip means house, yup means beside. And so this is saying the house beside mine. And it doesn't specifically say the house beside mine, but by context, I can imagine that it's saying the house, or next door, I would say, the house next door. And this here is saying not. And it's just, anida is nida. But what's happening, it's a very, very easy word that you probably see a lot, but it's being used in a fairly difficult way. What's happening is this part of the clause is actually going to describe this following part of the clause. Now, the way I can do that is I'm using this. And so what's happening is this part, or this noun, which ne means my, and jip ap so jip means house, ap means in front, and again, a refers to the place. So this is saying in front of my house. It's very hard to translate this directly and as the way it's written from Korean to English, but if I was going to, beat around the bush and basically say what it's saying is, well, where? Not in front of the house next door, but actually in front of my house. And in English, the grammar in English is so much different than the grammar in Korean for this type of sentence. It's very hard to describe. But what's happening in English, it would be not in front of my neighbor's house, but in front of my house. So we sort of have something, 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 but something, something, something. But in Korean, what they have, and the way they write this is, this thing here is describing this. And it's saying, well, where do you put it? You put it in the location that's not next door to my house, but it's actually my house. So it's stuff like this is really exciting to me. It's just so cool how the two grammar systems are so different, but when you look at it and I don't know, I always find it fun sort of translating these sentences that have such different grammar, and I like it in my head when my head sort of thinks about how this grammar can be so it's simple in my head, but it's just so different than English, and I find it really exciting. So anyways, this first question is, do you know? This next question is, where? And then this next question is, when? 언제 means when. And there's this kok again, this must. Hijin refers to the sunset. Hu means after the sunset. And then this just is saying to. And then this refers to 밤 means night. This, the way you would say this is 12시, which is midnight. And it could mean noon, but this says 밤 12시, so that means midnight. So I'll just say midnight here. Midnight. And this word here means, sae means between. Between. So what this is saying is, it must be after sunset. So they didn't give you a specific time for sunset because the sunset changes every day, of course. And you can think about why they wanted you to put your garbage out after sunset. Well, if you put your garbage out before sunset, people are going to walk by and they're going to see lots of garbage because it's light out. But if you put it out after sunset, it's going to be dark and nobody will see it, or less people will see it because it's dark out. So anyways, you could put it out after sunset until or it actually doesn't say until, but after sunset and midnight, and between that particular time. And then here's this verb again, and actually I already mentioned this. This is just a command. It doesn't really have a meaning on its own, but if you put this before a verb, it allows me to make that particular command. And this is what I was talking about earlier. Before I saw this word didn't have a space. And here I see this word and actually does have a space. And I'm telling you that there should not be a space here. But the reason why they did include a space is putting a space, so not this, but actually a space, a verb, and then adding this or this to the verb. And this is a little complex, but adding a verb, then adding this to a particular verb, and then having a space, and then putting this, notta, is actually a very common thing to do in Korean. And I'll give you an example. You can, for example, you could say 열어, and then again, that's 열다, which means to open. Here I have this, which is this thing here, and then a space, and then this this word here. This sort of has a meaning. So this, again, this would mean open. This would mean open. But adding this, and I have a whole lesson on what this would mean, and I'm going to show you the lesson before I tell you what it means. I think I have it at the beginning here. Here I talk about it here, adding this thing here, and then notta. What it does is, if you just said 열다 or 열어, for example, if I told my wife to open the door, I could just say 열어. But if I say 열어 나, and actually that's opening up a whole nother can of worms here. This, when in this situation, this actually gets pronounced as, if I say it as, this is getting too confusing, but if I add this to this to make this particular thing a command, it actually sounds like 열어 나, and it should actually sound like 열어 noa, but it very, very commonly gets translated or gets said as 열어 나. And again, if I say 열어, that would say open the door. And then after that, well, maybe my wife will close the door. I didn't specifically tell her that, but usually if I might say open the door, I might leave, and then she might close the door. But if I say 열어 나, that's actually telling my wife to open the door and keep it open. This is what this is particularly doing in the sentence, is telling the person to actually keep it in that state after you do this particular verb. Now, well, how does that relate to this? Well, it actually doesn't in any way. But it's interesting that because this is a specific grammatical principle on its own, where you have notta following a space, following a verb, because this is a common thing, they probably thought, well, this is what's happening here. I have this verb, and then there must be a space here to use this to use this next grammatical principle thing. But actually, it's a word on its own. And it's not really these two things mixed together. It's actually a word on its own that means, as I said before, to put outside, or to take outside and then leave outside once it's there. So anyways, all that just to say that you actually don't need a space here. This is just one word. And this would be, again, if I translated this whole thing, it would say, when am I going to put my garbage out? Well, definitely after sunset and until midnight, and between that time, that's when you should put your stuff out. If we go to this next one, 우리 means we or our, and in this case there's something after it, so it's saying our. 동네 means neighborhood. I don't have enough space, so I'll just use neighborhood. And then 쓰레기, again, we know means garbage. 배출 means to throw out, and it's, again, you could say it's very, very similar to 내놓다, but 내놓다 I just know off the top of my head that that's a Korean verb, but this is 배출 would be based off of Chinese characters, so you could sort of argue it has the same thing, but 배출 would be a more difficult way of saying it. So I'll just say throw out, and that's not really what it means, but you know what I'm getting at here. Throw out. 일 means day. So it says our neighborhood's garbage throwing out day, or if I was going to translate that to plain English, it would just be the garbage day in our neighborhood is. And that's would be 입니다. ida is the base form, but 입니다 would be the formal one. The garbage days, and it's actually not is, it's are, because there's three of them. There's 화, 목, 일. So 화 is Tuesday, 화요일 is Tuesday, 목요일 is Thursday, and then 일요일 is Sunday. So this sentence here would say our neighborhood's garbage throw-out day is Tuesday, Wednesday, or are Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. That's pretty much the whole thing. This part of the sign is just saying the neighborhood that we're in, and then there's only a few words left down, or two little clauses down here. It says 우리 집 길, and 우리 again means we, but if it could also describe something to say our. So our 집 길. And we've actually learned all those words somewhere in this sign. Again, our 집 means house, 길 means street, so our house street, and that's just, you could argue it's almost the same thing as 골목길. It's just the streets that our houses are on, the streets that we live on, these small streets that, of course, we don't want to have garbage on. 말끔하게 would mean neat or neatly. If you put ge at the end, it means neatly. So that would say, and again, neither of these are actually sentences because we don't have a predicating verb or adjective or ida at the end of them. They're just, it's very similar to this, where we're just saying, it's almost like a slogan or a saying that this particular neighborhood has. Our streets will be clean, or our streets are neat. I'm sorry, it's clean would be this one, but our streets are neat. And then again, our 동네, which we saw here, 우리 동네. Our neighborhood, clean. And clean is 깨끗하다, but 깨끗하게 would be cleanly. And again, it's hard to translate this perfectly into English, but again, this is sort of a slogan, and slogans would be very hard to translate to English. But this is sort of like saying our house, our little streets neatly, and our neighborhood cleanly. And that's the end of this sign. That was fun. I hope you learned a lot.